Elijah Walker stood in front of his class, holding the only A-POS project. But his teacher ripped it in half and said, "We don't reward lucky guesses." The room went silent, until someone caught it all on camera. Within hours, the video exploded online. But what no one saw was what Elijah did next. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The morning air was sharp, the kind that made your breath visible and your heartbeat louder. Elijah Walker stood at the edge of Crest Hill Academy's imposing brick steps, his fingers twitching against the strap of his worn-out backpack. His navy uniform was pressed to perfection, his shoes scrubbed until the white soles gleamed, but none of that could prepare him for what waited inside. Crest Hill Academy was old money and quiet expectations, the kind of school where names mattered more than grades, and legacies echoed louder than announcements. Elijah was neither a legacy nor a name. He was a transfer student from the South Side, admitted on merit, not favors, one of only 5 black students in the entire school, and the only one in the advanced sciences track. He stepped through the polished glass doors, nodding politely at the security guard who barely looked up. The hallway smelled of varnish and privilege. Students clustered in groups, their laughter light and practiced, like they'd grown up rehearsing it. Elijah walked alone, the air parting around him, not from awe but from unfamiliarity. The way people part when something doesn't quite fit. Room 207, AP Physics. He hesitated at the door for a half-second too long. Then, inhaling deeply, he stepped in. The classroom was already half full. Rows of gleaming lab tables stretched across the room, flanked by stools with chrome legs. At the front stood a man in a crisp gray suit, his back to the room, scribbling equations on a whiteboard that already looked like a battlefield of symbols and loops. The hum of casual conversation dimmed as Elijah entered. He scanned for an empty seat. There were a few, but most had bags slung across them. Territory claimed. He picked one near the middle, quietly moving a book aside. A blonde girl next to him shifted her chair slightly away. Not rudely but noticeably, Mr. Dalton Reeves turned around, capping his marker with practiced precision. His face was sharp, clean-shaven, and entirely unimpressed. "New face," he said, eyes locking onto Elijah like a laser. "Name?" "Elijah Walker," he replied, voice steady, eyes level. Reeves nodded once, slowly. "Right, the transfer. Top marks in your previous school, I hear." There was no praise in his tone, only examination. A subtle weighing of presence, of worth. "This class," Reeves began, walking to the center of the room, "isn't for everyone. It's designed to break you down, piece by piece, until only the best are left standing. There are no handouts here, no shortcuts, and certainly no quotas." The word hung in the air like a slap. A few students exchanged glances. One smirked. Elijah didn't flinch. He had heard worse. Reeves paced as he talked, a rhythm to his movement that matched the chill in his voice. "I've taught here for 18 years. I've sent students to MIT, Caltech, Stanford, and I've watched others crumble before the midterms. If you're here to coast, you'll fail. If you're here because someone felt sorry for you, you'll fail faster." He turned suddenly, marker in hand. "Pop quiz. Who can simplify Maxwell's equations to derive the speed of light?" Silent. Elijah raised his hand. Reeves raised an eyebrow. "Go ahead." Elijah stood and walked to the board. His hands moved with quiet confidence, numbers and variables flowing from muscle memory and long nights of self-study. In 2 minutes he stepped back, the derivation complete, clean, and correct. A few students looked impressed. Reeves did not. He said, scanning the board. "Good at memorizing. Let's see if you can think." Elijah's chest tightened slightly. He said nothing. Reeves turned back to the class. "Memorization is the lowest form of learning. True understanding requires struggle. Anyone can regurgitate. Few can innovate." He didn't look at Elijah again. But the message was clear. Laughter rippled through the room, the kind that hides behind coughs and side eyes. Elijah returned to his seat slowly, feeling the weight of invisible eyes. He stared down at his notebook, willing the heat in his ears to cool. This wasn't new, but it never got easier. When the bell rang, he waited for the room to empty before packing his things. Reeves was already at his desk, typing, not sparing him a glance. Elijah left quietly. Outside, the sun had climbed higher, but the chill in his chest remained. That evening, dinner was quiet. Denise Walker sat across from her son at their small kitchen table, the overhead light casting shadows onto the worn wood. She watched him push rice around his plate, his appetite as absent as his smile. "First day?" she asked, soft but firm. Elijah nodded without looking up. She waited. Years of raising him alone had taught her patience. He finally sighed. "The teacher doesn't think I belong there." "What makes you say that?" He made a point about quotas in front of the class. After I answered a question, Denise's hand froze over her glass. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Did he say your name?" "No. But everyone knew." Silence. Then she asked, "What did you do?" Elijah looked up. His eyes weren't angry. They were tired. "I'll just prove him wrong." Denise leaned forward. "That's not your job, baby. It's not your job to change his mind. But it is my future," Elijah said, and suddenly he sounded older than 16. She reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "You shine whether they see it or not." He nodded, but the conviction in his voice had gone quiet. The next morning, Elijah arrived early. He wanted the seat by the window, the one that caught just enough light to feel like a reminder that the world was bigger than four walls. Students filtered in, louder today, emboldened by routine. Whispers floated by him, none directed, all deliberate. Mr. Reeves entered precisely 1 minute before the bell, carrying a red folder and a familiar sneer. He didn't start with notes. He didn't start with a lecture. He started with a sentence. "Elijah Walker won't last this semester." Silence fell like a hammer. Elijah froze in place. Reeves smiled lightly. "This isn't personal. It's statistical." He held up a folder. "Elijah's transcript. We get 1 or 2 every year who test well, but collapse under pressure. It's no shame, just reality." The class murmured. A few smirked. One girl looked away, uncomfortable. Elijah said nothing. He couldn't. The words had knocked the air from his lungs. The bell rang. And just like that, the lesson began. Elijah stares blankly at the whiteboard, his ears still ringing with the words, "Elijah Walker won't last this semester." But deep inside, something begins to rise, not anger, but a quiet defiance that won't die quietly. When your teacher turns the class against you, who do you study with? Who has your back? For the first few days after Mr. Reeves's public gut punch, Elijah tried to pretend it didn't bother him. He kept his posture straight, eyes locked on the board, pen moving even when his mind stalled. But something invisible had shifted in the room. The way students looked at him, or didn't, changed overnight. He wasn't just a new student anymore. He was the outlier. The boy who got called out by the most respected teacher in the school. And not just called out, publicly labeled a failure in waiting. On Thursday, Reeves announced a lab partnership assignment. "Pair up," he said flatly. 2 people per station. Elijah stood up slowly, scanning the room. But within seconds, the seats around him filled with quiet precision. Ava slid her stool next to Madison. Liam and Bryce bumped fists. Even Taylor, the only other student who had briefly made eye contact with Elijah earlier in the week, edged toward the back where Jenna waved him over. In the space of 15 seconds, the classroom had closed ranks. Elijah was left standing, holding his lab packet, face unreadable. Reeves looked up from his desk. "Walker, looks like you'll work alone. That all right with you?" Elijah nodded once. "Yes, sir." But it wasn't all right, and they both knew it. In the weeks that followed, the pattern repeated itself, not just in physics but in the hallway, the lunchroom, and even during study periods. The unspoken message was clear: get too close to Elijah Walker, and you'll be next. At lunch, tables filled fast. He started eating in the library, wedged between dusty shelves and whispers of stories that didn't belong to him. He tried joining a study group for the AP Finals prep, messaging 3 classmates on the school app. Only one replied, "Sorry, already full. Try Taylor's group maybe." Taylor never responded. When he walked into the library one afternoon, he saw Taylor and the others at a round table, huddled over practice problems, plenty of space left but no invitation given. Elijah kept walking. He studied alone, reviewed the textbook twice, practiced physics simulations on free apps at night. But something strange started happening. His test scores began to dip, first an 84, then a 78. Then, inexplicably, a 70 on a unit he'd mastered months ago. He went home that night and pulled out his exam sheet. Every answer down to the variables matched the textbook, and more unsettlingly, matched Liam's answers too. They had studied the same content, just on opposite ends of the class. Elijah even overheard Liam say he barely studied for that test. Liam got a 9. Elijah got a 70, with a red slash under question 3. Poorly explained. He reviewed his explanation. It was correct, not worded exactly like the textbook, but scientifically accurate. He compared it with online model answers. His was fine, better than some. At dinner, Denise noticed the crease between his brows hadn't relaxed in days. Another test, she asked. He nodded, dropped again. You're doing your best? Yes, he said without hesitation. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Denise stared at him for a long time. Let me call someone. 2 days later, Denise requested a meeting with Principal Langford. They met in his office, a space neatly decorated with motivational posters and plaques from past donors. Reeves was already seated, legs crossed, reading a clipboard with a calculated expression. Thanks for coming in, Miss Walker, Langford said. What seems to be the concern? My son's being graded unfairly, she said, and he's being isolated in class. No one will work with him, and I'm starting to believe it's being quietly encouraged. Langford blinked. Encouraged by whom? Denise turned to Reeves. By him. Reeves smiled gently, like a man holding a teacup, not a dagger. I'm sorry Miss Walker feels that way, but I assure you I treat all students equally. Elijah's performance hasn't matched his earlier transcript. He's struggling. He works harder than anyone you'll ever meet. Denise shot back. And you humiliated him in class. I push all my students, Reeves said calmly. That's how they grow. Some rise to the occasion. Others, well, it's not for everyone. Langford stepped in. Miss Walker, I understand your concern, but Mr. Reeves has been a valued educator here for over 18 years. He's never had a complaint filed before. Denise's jaw tightened. Maybe because most of the kids he pushes out don't have parents who know how to fight back. Langford straightened slightly. We'll review his grades. But unless we see clear evidence of bias, I trust Mr. Reeves' professional judgment. That night, Elijah sat on the edge of his bed, while Denise folded laundry nearby. They won't help, she said quietly. I know. I want to transfer you. I'm not leaving, Elijah replied. That's what they want. Denise folded a shirt in silence, hands trembling just enough for Elijah to notice. On a Wednesday afternoon, Reeves returned a set of lab reports. As he moved through the rows, he called out grades like a roll call. Bryce, A-. Strong conclusion. Over. D. Good analysis, weak formatting. Walker. He paused. The room stilled. He dropped the paper on Elijah's desk with a dull thud. A large red D marked the top corner. Beneath it in unmistakable penmanship was a note. Barely understood, confused logic. Elijah stared at the page. His write-up was perfect. It followed the same format Reeves used in class. Same formulas. Same conclusions. He had spent 3 hours cross-checking data tables and referencing journal sources. Liam leaned over just enough for Elijah to glimpse his paper. Similar content, fewer citations. He hadn't. Elijah felt his throat tighten. He didn't react, didn't ask questions, just slid the paper into his folder. But inside, something cracked. Not a loud break, just a hairline fracture down the middle of his silence. He stayed after class, waiting until the last student had filed out. Mr. Reeves, he said, holding up the report. I don't understand the grade. Reeves barely looked up. You're not following the logic. Your methodology is messy. I followed the exact structure you showed last week. I cited all data sources. Reeves finally met his eyes. Elijah, science isn't about checking boxes. It's about comprehension. You're mimicking steps, but there's no clarity. There's nothing unclear about my conclusion. Reeves sighed. You're not ready for this level. Maybe consider the regular physics course. The implication landed like a slap. Elijah swallowed hard. Is that what you told the other black students who took your class? Reeves blinked slowly, then smiled, not with amusement, but with precision. I don't see color, Elijah. Only results. Elijah walked out of the room without another word, fists clenched so tightly that his fingernails left crescent moons in his palms. That night, Elijah sat at his desk holding the marked paper under a desk lamp. He pulled out a ruler, began lining up each paragraph, each equation, but halfway through he stopped. Something didn't add up, not in the math but in the message. What happens when the system smiles politely while holding the knife? Denise Walker didn't come to the meeting empty-handed. Her purse was stuffed with neatly organized manila folders, color-coded tabs, and annotated grade reports that spanned Elijah's academic history from middle school to last week. She even printed screenshots of his online homework, complete with timestamps, correct answers, and feedback that contradicted the grades he was now receiving. She had raised her son on truth, effort, and preparation, and today she would come armed with all three. The receptionist at Crest Hill Academy led her down a pristine hallway lined with awards and class photos. At the end of it was a door marked Admin Conference. Private. She took a breath, rolled her shoulders back, and stepped inside. Principal Langford stood first, polished, mid-50s, with a navy tie and a trained warmth in his voice. "Ms. Walker, thank you for coming. Please, have a seat." Denise offered a polite smile, glancing at the man seated across the table. Mr. Dalton Reeves, calm, poised, legs crossed, a cup of tea in hand like he was hosting brunch, not facing allegations of academic misconduct. "I appreciate your time," Denise said. Her voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. Langford opened a folder. "We understand you have concerns about Elijah's performance." She nodded, pulling out her stack of documents. "I've tracked Elijah's grades since the semester began. You'll see here," she pointed, flipping to a spreadsheet, "that his test answers match Crest Hill's own published answer keys. Yet his scores keep dropping." Reeves didn't even look at the papers. "I think Elijah's struggling with the transition. Crest Hill is academically rigorous. Some students experience pressure, especially if they're used to being at the top elsewhere." Denise narrowed her eyes. "So you're saying the issue isn't with how he's being graded, but with his ability to adapt?" "I'm saying," Reeves replied smoothly, "that it's not uncommon for transfer students to need time. Elijah seems anxious, quiet. Sometimes that affects clarity of thought. I can't award grades based on effort alone." Langford leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Reeves has been with us for over 20 years, Miss Walker. He's produced National Merit Scholars, Intel winners, and Ivy League admits. His methods are direct, but fair." "And how many black students has he taught in AP Physics during those 20 years? Denise asked. Langford's face tightened. Reeves answered instead. "Race isn't a factor in my classroom." "Then why did you say no quotas on the first day?" Reeves shrugged slightly. "It's an unfortunate phrase that some misinterpret. I meant we don't lower our standards. That applies to everyone equally." Denise placed one final paper on the table. Elijah's most recent lab report, the one that earned a D. Highlighted in yellow were the scientific steps, correct equations, and detailed annotations. "Tell me what's wrong with this report." Reeves glanced at it. "It's formulaic, no critical thinking." He copied the format without demonstrating understanding. He did exactly what the rubric asked. He showed process, analysis, and conclusion. "I saw no originality," Reeves said. "There's a difference between following directions and mastering content." Langford cleared his throat. "Perhaps we could suggest tutoring support. We have a peer-led program." "He doesn't need tutoring," Denise said sharply. "He needs to be evaluated fairly." Langford sighed. "Ms. Walker, I don't want you to feel unheard, but we also have to respect professional judgment. Mr. Reeves has not had any prior complaints, because students of color don't stay long enough to file them." Reeves leaned back in his chair, his tone suddenly softer. "Ms. Walker, I'm not targeting your son. I'm trying to prepare him for the world. It won't always be forgiving. Better he face challenge here, than crumble later." Denise's voice broke, not with weakness, but with fury contained too long. "You think this is about preparation? This is about power. You've made him a target, then played the expert when he reacts." Langford glanced at the clock. "I understand emotions are high. We'll continue to monitor the situation, but unless there's concrete evidence of discrimination, there's not much more we can do formally." Denise stood slowly, collecting her papers one by one. "Don't worry," she said, eyes locked on Reeves. "I'll find the evidence." In the car, the silence between mother and son stretched longer than the drive itself. Elijah stared out the window as the city passed in blurs of brick, steel, and glass. "What did he say?" Elijah asked. Denise's hands tightened on the wheel. He smiled. "A lot." Elijah gave a humorless chuckle. "That's how they do it. Smile while you bleed." Denise glanced at him, guilt creeping into her voice. "I thought, maybe if we showed them the work, the truth, they'd listen." Elijah turned, finally facing her. "They're not trying to listen. They're trying to wear me down. Denise didn't answer, because he wasn't wrong. When they pulled into their apartment complex, she reached across the gear shift and touched his hand. Just give it a little more time. Maybe something will shift. Elijah looked at her for a long moment, then shook his head. They don't want me to win, Ma. His voice wasn't angry. It was flat, not defeated, but changed, like something inside had hardened, like glass cooling too fast. The next morning at school, Elijah kept his eyes down as he moved through the hallway. He could feel the quiet mockery that came with each glance, the kind that didn't need words. When he reached his locker, something caught his eye. A single sheet of paper, folded, taped neatly to the center. He peeled it off slowly. Black marker, all caps, 2 words underlined twice. Quota kid, know your place. The hallway spun slightly. For a second Elijah couldn't move, couldn't breathe. He turned, scanning the lockers. No one was watching. Or if they were, they weren't reacting. He looked back at the note. The font was jagged. Rushed, done by someone who didn't expect to be caught, or didn't care if they were. He crumpled it quietly and shoved it deep into his backpack. But the words stayed etched in the back of his mind, whispering like a dare. Elijah opened his locker, but inside, instead of his books, he found his science textbooks soaked through, and the words drop out scratched into the inside door. How long can one student carry excellence, racism, and silence before something breaks? Elijah Walker woke up to the sound of his alarm clock at 5:15 a.m. The 4th morning in a row. He didn't have time to hit snooze. The stack of assignments on his desk hadn't grown shorter overnight, and the late shift he picked up at the corner gas station had left his shoulders aching like he'd carried bricks in his backpack instead of books. He moved through the morning in silence, brushed his teeth, folded his sheets, toasted a slice of bread and ate it standing up, eyes scanning his notes under the fluorescent kitchen light. He and his mother barely crossed paths these days. She left early for the clinic, working double shifts to cover what his scholarship didn't. School was supposed to be the one thing he could control, but it had become a slow, grinding machine, chewing through him bit by bit. His schedule was a blur. 7 hours of academics, 4 hours of work, 3 hours of solo studying, and whatever fragments were left for sleep. And for what? Every test he handed in came back looking like a crime scene, red ink bleeding across the margins, comments like unclear logic, or did not show full thought process, even when he double-checked everything. He started watching other students' papers when they got handed back. Liam, who always joked about not studying, was sailing with A's. Ava, who once copied off Elijah's quiz when Reeves wasn't looking, had a 92, Elijah had a 71. Same answers, same structure, same logic, different skin. He once tried to speak to Reeves, after class, but the teacher simply gave him a tight-lipped smile. You're doing what you can, Elijah. But this isn't middle school. This is where the cream rises. The way he said cream, light, deliberate, stayed with Elijah all the way home. The whispers in class weren't even whispers anymore. Why is he still here? Doesn't know when to quit. Affirmative action in action. They never said it loud enough for teachers to intervene. But they didn't have to. Mr. Reeves never stopped them. Sometimes he'd look up from his desk with that distant smile. Once, Elijah caught him smirking when Bryce made a joke under his breath about Elijah doing diversity's work. The loneliness was bone deep now. It wasn't just that no one partnered with him. It was the isolation of knowing he could be perfect on paper and still be treated like a problem. One afternoon, Elijah sat in the back corner of the school library, books open in front of him, but the words refused to stick. His hand trembled as he tried to solve a physics equation he'd done a dozen times before. Dishima. He wrote it, then paused, then erased it, wrote it again, and erased it again. His mind, once sharp and quick, now felt fogged and hollow. He pressed his fingers against his temples, breathing slow and shallow. He wasn't failing physics. He was being made to feel like he was failing himself. That night, he worked his shift at the gas station, until close. The hum of the cooler, the flickering light above the register, the smell of old coffee, they blurred into one long, aching noise. By the time he got home, it was past midnight. His room was still. He opened his textbook, made it through 2 paragraphs, then stared blankly at the same sentence for 10 minutes. Eventually, he fell asleep over his notes, cheek pressed into a sheet of paper covered in ink-smudged formulas. Denise found him like that at 6 in the morning. Her voice caught in her throat before she could call his name. The overhead light cast a hard line across his face, eyelids fluttering in half-sleep, lips slightly parted, pencil still clutched in one hand. On the corner of the desk she saw tear stains, dried, but unmistakable. She placed a hand on his back. He didn't stir, so she kissed the top of his head and whispered, "I'm proud of you," even though he wasn't awake to hear it. Later that day, Mr. Reeves was in rare form. A midterm was approaching, and he strutted through the classroom like a game show host. "This is where we separate the dreamers from the doers," he said, scribbling complex systems of equations across the board. Then he turned. "Walker," he called out suddenly. Elijah looked up, his pencil stilling in his hand. "Want to take a shot at this one?" Elijah stood and approached the whiteboard. He started writing, hands steady, voice low, explaining each step. Reeves cut in halfway. "Incorrect." Elijah paused. "That's the solution from your notes on Tuesday." Reeves smiled thinly. "Then perhaps you misunderstood my notes. Happens when you're tired or overwhelmed." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. A few students exchanged grins. Reeves looked directly at him. "MIT doesn't take kids who break under pressure." The words weren't just cruel. They were calculated, designed to sting in front of an audience. And they did. They slithered under Elijah's skin, coiling around every moment he had ever believed he could rise. He walked back to his seat without a word. But this time, something inside had changed. Not broken, just hardened. That evening, Elijah stood in front of the mirror. His tie was still knotted, his shoulders still stiff, but the look in his eyes was different. There was no wetness there, no trembling, only fire. "I'm not going to beg," he said softly. "I'm going to prove." He reached into his backpack and pulled out a small digital recorder, the kind his mom had once used to practice speeches at work. He tested the battery. He slipped it into his hoodie pocket. The next day he would go to class. He would sit quietly. He would watch and listen. And this time, he would record everything. Elijah pressed record, just as Mr. Reeves walked in, unaware that his next words would be captured forever. One moment of cruelty, captured on tape, can shatter the mask of years of respectability. The recorder sat silent and small in Elijah's hoodie pocket, no larger than a thumb drive, but heavier than anything he'd ever carried. Every time Mr. Reeves spoke, Elijah could feel it humming against his chest, not physically, but through the pressure in his ribs, the tension in his neck, the awareness that something irreversible was happening. He didn't know what exactly he was looking for. Maybe proof, maybe clarity, maybe a crack in the mask. What he got was more than he expected. It happened during an end-of-week discussion. Reeves was explaining thermodynamics when he turned suddenly, like a wolf catching a scent. "Walker," he said. "Define entropy." Elijah answered confidently, textbook precision in every syllable. But Reeves interrupted halfway through. "See, that's your problem," he said, stepping closer. "You speak like someone who's memorized every page but hasn't lived a single idea." The class grew still. Reeves lowered his voice, not whispering, just enough to make it seem like he was confiding something important. "You're not like the rest. There's arrogance without ability, and that's dangerous in science." The words cut deep, and they were meant to. Daggered praise delivered with surgical malice. Elijah didn't respond. He didn't blink, but the recorder in his pocket didn't miss a word. That night, he sat in his bedroom, blinds drawn, headphones on. The lights were off. He played the clip 3 times, each listen sharpening his sense of violation. The tone, the condescension, the suggestion that he was inherently less. It was all there, not coded, not ambiguous. He sent the audio file to one person, Malik. They hadn't spoken much since Elijah transferred to Crest Hill, but Malik was still his closest friend, someone who always saw through fake smiles and fake systems. Within minutes, Malik replied,
"Malik, what the hell?"
"Elijah, it's been like this since day one." "Malik, you want this out there?" "Elijah, I don't know. Just needed someone else to hear it. Needed to make sure I'm not crazy." Malik didn't respond right away. Then,
"Malik, you're not crazy."
"He is." Elijah powered off his phone and tried to sleep. By morning, the world had shifted. He woke to 47 missed texts, and a phone screen flooded with notification banners. A friend request from someone he didn't know. An email from a reporter he'd never heard of. His heart dropped into his stomach. He opened his phone. The audio clip was online, not just posted. Shared. Circulating. Malik had uploaded it to a private story late that night. Someone had screen recorded it. Another person had boosted it to Twitter. And now it was viral. The caption read, "Teacher at elite school humiliates black student in front of class." Listen to this. The sound quality wasn't perfect, but it didn't have to be. "You're not like the rest. Arrogance without ability." The quote was already trending. At Crest Hill, the shift was instant and disorienting. Whispers filled the halls like static electricity. Students glanced at Elijah, then quickly looked away. Teachers stood in huddles, speaking in low tones. Some students wore smirks. Others looked apologetic. Ava gave him a nod in the hallway. It wasn't much, but it wasn't nothing. During second period, Liam slid him a screenshot across the table. 45K plays, 3K comments, 10K shares. Underneath he scribbled, "Was this really from last week?" Elijah didn't answer. He hadn't told anyone to post it. Hadn't asked for this. He hadn't planned to be the subject of a digital reckoning. But now that it was out, there was no pulling it back. The school issued a short internal memo by noon. Crest Hill Academy does not condone discriminatory behavior. We are reviewing a situation involving a faculty member. Further statements will be made pending investigation. Translation: We've been caught. Please calm down. But the internet wasn't calming. Parents started posting. Alumni started chiming in. People were digging through old Reddit threads, uncovering posts about cold teachers with coded bias at Crest Hill. A TikTok was made. A slideshow of Elijah walking down the hallway, paired with audio clips and text overlays. He tried to bury him. He didn't know Elijah was a seed. Within hours it hit 100K likes. And then the backlash came. "He's being too sensitive. This is just tough love. My teacher said worse to me." People are so quick to call everything racist now. A popular educational YouTuber reposted the clip with the caption, "Is this mentorship or humiliation? Let's discuss." The comment section became a war zone. Elijah's name was now a hashtag. And all he could do was walk the same sterile halls, while the school tried to pretend nothing was happening. At lunch, he sat outside under the back stairwell, alone, just like always. Malik called. "You okay?" Elijah paused. "Not sure. I'm sorry, man. I didn't think it would blow up like this." Elijah exhaled. "I didn't either. I didn't want to be the kid who cries racism every time he gets a bad grade." "You didn't," Malik said. "You exposed someone who hides behind power. That's not crying. That's surviving." "But now I'm the story," Elijah muttered. "I didn't want to be the story. I just wanted to be a student." "You still are," Malik replied. "You just became the lesson too." Elijah said nothing. After the call, he stared at the wall for a long time. By fourth period, the pressure cracked. Mr. Reeves wasn't in class. A substitute handed out worksheets with no explanation. The students didn't say much, but the room was thick with unspoken curiosity. When Elijah opened his locker later, he found a note wedged between his books. Not hate this time. Just a message. "We see you now. Keep going." No name, no signature. Just 5 words that made his throat tighten. He read it twice, folded it gently, and tucked it into his back pocket. That's when the announcement came over the intercom. "Elijah Walker, please report to Mr. Reeves' office. Immediately." The words echoed through the hallway like a sentence. He walked slowly. Every step felt longer than the last. When he reached the office, Reeves was standing by the window, arms crossed. He turned when Elijah entered. No smile this time. No warmth. Just ice. "Close the door." Elijah hesitated, then clicked it shut. Mr. Reeves stepped forward and said, "You think that clip will save you? Let me tell you what it's gonna cost." And then he reached out and locked the door behind him. When your abuser wears a suit and smiles, the real threat is always behind closed doors. The door clicked shut like the start of a countdown. Elijah stood still, backpack slung over one shoulder, heart hammering like it was preparing to punch through his chest. Mr. Reeves leaned back against the edge of his desk, arms folded, that same gray tie knotted with the same precision as always. But the calm veneer he wore so effortlessly now seemed thinner, like a mask fraying at the edges. "So," Reeves began, voice too smooth, "we've made you famous." Elijah didn't answer. His hand hovered near the strap of his bag, grounding himself. "I thought about calling your mother," Reeves said, walking around the desk slowly. "But then I realized, this isn't a conversation about parents. It's about futures." He stopped in front of Elijah, just close enough for the air between them to tighten. Colleges call me, Reeves said, voice dropping into something almost intimate. Every year, they want to know who can handle pressure, who's a thinker, who's a risk. You know what I tell them. Elijah didn't move. I tell them the truth, Reeves said, smiling like he'd just shared a secret. I tell them which students will make them proud, and which ones won't. He turned back toward the window, hands in his pockets. You think that clip will save you, he said? You think it means anything in 6 months? Internet outrage has the shelf life of a carton of milk. One more news cycle, and everyone forgets. Elijah clenched his jaw. People heard what you said, and they'll forget, Reeves shot back, his voice suddenly sharper. Because they always do. You'll be left with a reputation, and no references. And without references, Elijah, you don't go to MIT. You don't go anywhere. Elijah took a breath. You're threatening me. Reeves smiled again. I'm educating you. A long pause passed between them, but the silence said more than the words. The air in the office felt different now, not just heavy, but intentional, like the walls had ears, but the wrong ones. You're intelligent, Reeves said, returning to his desk, but not wise. You don't understand how these places work yet. Excellence is one thing. Navigating power is another. Elijah's voice was steady when he spoke. You mean surviving people like you? Reeves didn't answer, just reached for a folder and began flipping through papers, dismissing Elijah with the turn of a page. You can go now, he said. But the moment Elijah opened the door, Reeves added one more thing. Oh, and don't be surprised if the administration starts asking questions about your classroom behavior. You've been difficult lately. Elijah didn't respond. He walked out the door, pulse in his ears like static, knowing that Reeves hadn't just warned him. He'd fired the first bullet. The next day, Elijah was pulled into the main office by an assistant principal who didn't meet his eyes. There's been a report, she said, reading from a printout. Your teacher has expressed concern about recurring disruptions, inappropriate recording, and what he described as a pattern of defiance. Elijah stared at her. I haven't disrupted anything. She nodded stiffly. Still, Principal Langford wants to place you under formal behavioral review. Nothing disciplinary for now. Just observation. Elijah sat in silence for a beat too long. Can I go? He asked quietly. She nodded. As he stood, she added, this would be a good time to consider whether AP Physics is the right fit for you. You've been under a lot of stress. There's no shame in stepping back. Elijah didn't look at her. He walked straight to his academic counselor's office. Ms. Landon had always been polite but distant, one of those adults who smiled a lot, but said very little. Her office was full of motivational quotes and student success stories pinned to the walls. But when Elijah sat across from her that afternoon, she didn't smile. I heard, she said gently. About what? Elijah asked, though he already knew. The video, the fallout, the tension. She folded her hands.
Elijah, you're bright. No one questions that. But sometimes it's okay to pivot. Maybe you don't need AP Physics this year. There's an independent study option. You'd still graduate on track.
He narrowed his eyes. You want me to drop the class? I want you to be safe. Supported, not under this kind of pressure. But if I drop, that gets reported too, right? Colleges see that. Mrs. Landon looked down at her desk. You're telling me to protect my peace by giving up my fight, Elijah said quietly. No, she said. I'm telling you to survive it. He stood slowly. I didn't ask for survival, he said. I came here to win. He walked out without waiting for her response. That night, Elijah sat at his desk with his laptop open and a half-written essay on the screen. He was supposed to be writing a report on kinetic energy, but his cursor blinked on an empty line. The real energy in the room was rage and purpose. He opened another tab and searched statewide STEM competitions for high school juniors. Within minutes, he found one, the New Horizons Challenge, a statewide research expo that pulled in the brightest minds across the region. Robotics, physics, engineering, renewable energy. Winners got media attention, letters of recommendation from industry leaders, and most importantly, a pipeline to elite universities. Elijah's fingers moved quickly. He filled out his background, GPA, and essay of intent. He described a theoretical project he'd been sketching for months, a low-cost solar water filtration system for under-resourced communities. It wasn't complete, but it was real. It was him. The form required a faculty sponsor. He paused. The drop-down menu listed all Crest Hill staff, He scrolled past every name until he reached Mr. Dalton Reeves. He clicked. A warning message popped up. You are selecting a teacher sponsor. An automated confirmation will be sent. He hesitated, then clicked confirm. A small confirmation box appeared. Application submitted. Faculty contact will be notified shortly. Elijah leaned back in his chair. This time, he smiled first. Across town, Mr. Reeves opened his inbox and stared at the subject line. You have been selected as a faculty sponsor for the New Horizons State STEM competition. His jaw tightened. When every door is slammed in your face, sometimes you break a window and build your own future through it. When Mr. Reeves opened the email, his expression didn't crack. He sat alone in his classroom, shades half drawn, the morning sun turning his silver-rimmed glasses into mirrors. The subject line glared back at him like an accusation. You have been selected as a faculty sponsor for the New Horizons State STEM competition. He clicked, expecting a mistake. But there it was. Student name, Elijah Walker. Project title, Low-Cost Solar-Powered Filtration for Rural and Underserved Communities. Faculty sponsor, Mr. Dalton Reeves. No request. No approval. No warning. Reeves sat back in his chair, fingers steepled. For a brief moment, his jaw clenched. Then he leaned forward and deleted the email. But the platform had already accepted the submission. Elijah had outmaneuvered him, and done it by using the very system Reeves worshipped. He couldn't pull the sponsorship without providing cause, and cause would mean paperwork, questions, oversight. It would mean saying on record, I want this student to fail. And Dalton Reeves wasn't stupid. He'd smile through it. For now, Elijah worked in silence. Not out of fear anymore, but focus. He built the early framework of his filtration prototype in the corner of his bedroom. Old wires, salvage tubing, clear plastic tanks from a discarded fish tank. The solar panel was an old one Malik's uncle had used for a backyard light system. It still held a weak charge, but could be modified. Malik's garage became their workshop. Saturday nights turned into engineering marathons. They soldered wires beneath bare bulbs, printed mock casings on a 3D printer borrowed from a community lab, and used tinfoil to redirect energy into a small portable heating chamber that purified water. Every screw they turned was a kind of prayer. Every piece of tape, resistance. Elijah sketched late into the night, his eyes bloodshot but his hands steady. Each time he hit a roadblock, he researched deeper, watched tutorials, read open-source engineering blogs, and every step forward was another step out of Reeves' shadow. He didn't have institutional support, he didn't have a lab team, or Crest Hill's blessing. But he had belief. Denise noticed the change in her son before he said a word. There was a fire behind his fatigue now, a quiet humming motor that pulled him forward. She drove him to parts stores, picking through bins of used tech with the same patience she had used when helping him learn multiplication tables at the kitchen table. All those years ago, she brought home energy bars, checked power outlets, reviewed wiring diagrams while reheating leftovers at midnight. You know this could change everything. Right, she said one night. Elijah didn't look up. It has to. But Crest Hill didn't make it easy. As the competition deadline approached, Reeves became more subtle in his sabotage. Elijah was written up twice for lateness despite arriving on time. The school claimed his previous assignments had been incomplete despite receipts, screenshots, and submission confirmations. A month before the expo, he received notice that his honor roll status had been revoked due to disciplinary inconsistencies. Elijah walked into the principal's office with a folder full of printed timestamps and documentation. Langford never looked up from his desk. These things happen, Elijah, he said. Clean slate next semester. But next semester doesn't get me into MIT. Langford offered a tight smile. Don't blame the system for being thorough. Elijah left without slamming the door. But only barely. 1 week before the first prototype review, Elijah requested use of the school's underutilized lab to run water purity tests on a larger model. The science department approved it under the condition he work alone and outside of regular class hours. He agreed. For the next 5 evenings, he stayed late, testing solar charging intervals, modifying circuitry, and charting filtration rates. The beaker results began to align with his theoretical goals. The water came out clean. He was almost there. He was tired, but he was winning. And then, one Friday evening, he unlocked the lab door to find disaster. The prototype lay smashed across the floor. Cables shredded. Solar panel cracked down the middle. water tank punctured and leaking into the tiles. A wrench his own lay nearby. There was no note. No sign of forced entry. Only silence. Like the project had imploded on its own.
But Elijah knew better.
He stared at the wreckage, breathing in shallow, controlled bursts. He knelt, pressing his fingers into the twisted casing like he could still feel its last heartbeat. The silence that followed wasn't broken by anger. It was broken by footsteps. Elijah turned sharply, but the hallway was empty. Still, the echo had come from somewhere. He stood slowly, walking to the hallway window overlooking the back courtyard. Two silhouettes disappeared around the corner. One walked like he had nothing to hide. The other, taller, thinner, turned once. Elijah couldn't see his face, but the shape of his posture said enough, and his heart sank. It wasn't Reeves. It was someone worse. Someone who still wore the face of a classmate. Elijah stared at the shattered remains of his future, then reached into his pocket and checked the small motion-detecting recorder he had started carrying, and saw it had captured everything. What happens when even your hard work is destroyed, and the system pretends it never happened? The moment Elijah replayed the recorder's feed, he knew what he had in his hands wasn't just evidence. It was war. The camera, small, mounted in the corner of his bag, had picked up movement, shadows, muffled voices. The grainy footage showed two students entering the lab late at night, using what looked like a copy of the master key. One of them was tall and lanky, the other kept glancing over his shoulder nervously. Their voices were faint, but one line came through with cruel clarity. "He's gonna lose his mind when he sees this." Then came laughter, metal smashing, water hitting the floor, and silence. Elijah leaned back, the cold from the lab tiles still lingering in his spine. He transferred the file to a thumb drive and took it straight to the main office the next morning. He sat in front of the assistant principal, Mr. Harrow, a square-jawed man with polite detachment etched into his features. Elijah handed over the USB drive and explained everything, step by step, hour by hour. Harrow nodded slowly, then said, "Unfortunately, the lab's camera system wasn't active that night. Maintenance log shows a technical fault in the recording schedule." Elijah blinked. "But I have footage. From my own device." "We'll review it," Harrow said, not unkindly. "But you should know it may not be admissible without consent from the students recorded. They destroyed my work. Do you have proof they did it intentionally?" Elijah's voice tightened. "They laughed about it." Harrow folded his hands. "The district policy is strict on unauthorized recording. This could become complicated for you if shared irresponsibly." And there it was. Not justice, not accountability. Leverage. Elijah stood, quietly slipping the USB back into his pocket. He walked out without another word. Later that day, Mr. Reeves addressed the entire class before the bell rang. "Word travels fast," he said, adjusting the sleeves of his pressed dress shirt. "Seems one of our students experienced some difficulty with their STEM project." Elijah sat stiffly at his table, eyes fixed on the corner of his notebook. "Accidents happen," Reeves continued. "And sometimes under pressure, students start looking for someone to blame. It's easier than accepting that they weren't prepared." A few students chuckled. One of them turned to glance at Elijah. He didn't flinch. Reeves added, almost as an afterthought, "But don't worry, I'm sure Elijah will bounce back. Resilience is part of the learning curve." The words were wrapped in faux kindness, but the knife inside wasn't hidden at all. At lunch, Elijah told Malik everything. "I have the footage. They're just refusing to act on it." Malik slammed his hand on the table. "That's obstruction. That's straight-up cover-up. You need to go public." "Not yet," Elijah said. "They'll try to twist it. Make it about the footage being unauthorized. I need to rebuild first." "You gonna do it alone?" Elijah hesitated. "I was going to try." Malik shook his head and pulled out his phone. "You're not. I'm calling my cousin." Malik's cousin, Terrence, was a junior mechanical engineer at a community startup. When he showed up that night in a black hoodie and jeans, Elijah half expected him to give a motivational speech. Instead, he pulled out his toolbox and got to work. "All right," Terrence said, laying the wreckage out on Malik's garage table. "This is a setback, not a death sentence." Together, they worked through the weekend, rewiring solar cells, replacing a damaged UV lens. Terrence taught Elijah how to reinforce the tank housing to prevent future tampering. He didn't speak much, just guided, corrected, adjusted. By Sunday night, the filtration system was working better than before. "I never had teachers like yours," Terrence said as he packed up his tools. "But I had the same walls. You don't knock him down by being quiet. Elijah nodded. He wouldn't be quiet anymore. Word began to spread. At first it was just whispers. Then whispers turned into questions. Did someone really mess with his project? Is it true he rebuilt it in 3 days? He got help from outside Crest Hill. Some students avoided Elijah completely. But others, ones who had always stayed on the edges of Reeves's authority, started nodding in the hallway. Quiet affirmations. A girl from chemistry handed him a spare beaker. A freshman held a door open for him and mumbled, "Good luck on your project." But the most unexpected moment came from Ava. She approached Elijah one afternoon as he was packing up in the library. She hesitated, then slipped a small USB drive into his hand. "I recorded something," she whispered. "I didn't know what to do with it. But I think you'll know." Before he could respond, she turned and walked out. Back at home, Elijah plugged in the drive. The video was short, 42 seconds. Grainy. Filmed through the small glass window of the lab door. 2 students, Bryce and Liam, stood in the center laughing. The prototype already half destroyed. And then, unmistakably, the voice of Mr. Reeves echoing faintly from just outside the door. "Just don't leave a mess. You want to teach him a lesson, not give him ammo." Elijah froze. His heart thundered. It wasn't just student cruelty anymore. It was orchestration, permission, encouragement. He stared at the screen, jaw clenched, hands trembling. Then he clicked upload, not publicly, just to a single folder, one only he controlled. But he knew the moment was coming, the moment where silence would no longer protect them, or him. 2 days later, the footage leaked. Elijah hadn't released it. He never found out who did. But there it was, posted to a student-run Twitter page, with the caption, "Crest Hill Honors students caught vandalizing black students' STEM project. Teacher allegedly encouraged it." It exploded in minutes. Students shared it. Alumni weighed in. The video landed on local news feeds, packaged with the now infamous audio clip from Elijah's class. Side by side, comment sections turned into battlegrounds. "This is beyond bullying. This is targeted sabotage. That teacher needs to be fired immediately. How does a school that prides itself on excellence allow this to happen?" By sunset, Elijah's name was trending again. But this time it wasn't just sympathy. It was outrage. The school's silence had finally become its own statement, and the world was no longer willing to accept it. That night, Elijah received an anonymous email with no subject line. Inside was a single sentence: "They're going to try to silence you next." One leaked clip can shake an institution. But what if they still refuse to listen? The video detonated like a bomb. By 9 a.m., the footage of Bryce and Liam trashing Elijah's project, followed by Reeves's unmistakable voice, giving implicit permission, had been reposted over 12,000. The caption grew bolder with each retweet. "Crest Hill Honors student sabotage black peers STEM project, teacher linked." By noon, Justice for Elijah was trending across social platforms. TikTok edits layered the footage with music and side-by-side comparisons to civil rights moments, fueling a viral wave that pulled in students, parents, educators, and activists from across the country. Local news picked it up first, then regional, then national. Black STEM student sabotaged by peers. Teacher accused of orchestrating racism behind the scenes. Reporters began showing up outside Crest Hill's pristine brick gates. Students snapped photos from their phones, their sterile private school bubble now pierced by outside scrutiny. The headlines were clear, the outrage louder. But the school was silent. Officially, Crest Hill Academy made one brief statement through a generic spokesperson. "We take allegations of misconduct seriously. At this time, Mr. Reeves has been placed on temporary administrative leave while we review recent events. No further comment. No apology. No admission. No investigation. Just delay." Denise sat at the kitchen table that night, her phone pressed between trembling fingers. 3 calls in the last 2 hours. No voicemail. No name. Just silence and hang-ups. "You sure you're okay?" Elijah asked, gently pulling the phone from her hand. "I've been through worse," she muttered. "But this isn't just about you anymore, baby. You rattled something." Elijah nodded. He knew. He felt it in his own skin, how deep the roots of this went. And with every new comment, every supportive post, came another message in the dark. His email was now a battleground. For every message of hope, there was one of hate. "You're just looking for attention. This is why your kind never lasts in real science. Drop out before you are ruined." He read them all. Not because he believed them, but because he wanted to understand the depth of what he was fighting. And then, amid the flood of messages, one stood out. From unknown sender 10. Subject, no subject. Body, they're going to try to silence you next. That was all. No name. No attachments. No clue who sent it. Elijah read it 4 times, and then deleted it. Not out of fear, but because he had already accepted the truth behind it. They were already trying. The next day, the school board announced an emergency closed-door meeting. No media, no student input, just internal faculty review. Students protested outside the admin building, holding hand-drawn signs. We want the truth. Protect black students. Science shouldn't be silent. But the doors stayed closed. Inside, Principal Langford met with trustees and board members, faces Elijah had never seen, all behind a veil of authority and distance. Mr. Reeves wasn't present. Neither was Denise. Neither was Elijah. He watched from outside the window, surrounded by cameras and whispers. Malik stood beside him, arms folded. You think they'll actually do something? Malik asked. No, Elijah said. Not unless they have no choice. And right now the board still believed they had options. They still believed the fire could be controlled. But they were wrong. That night, Elijah sat in front of his laptop scrolling through reposts of his own name. The digital world had turned him into something symbolic, both victim and warrior, both headline and cautionary tale. But in real life, he was still a student with dark circles under his eyes and bruises on his dreams. Denise walked in quietly and sat beside him. They want to bury this, she said. I know, but you're not buried, she added. You're planted. He looked at her, his throat tight. I can't stop, he whispered. Then don't, she said. But don't do it alone anymore. At 11:14 p.m., Elijah received a message on his private STEM forum account. Your name Marcus Green 8. Subject, urgent. I have proof. He opened it with cautious curiosity. The message was short. You're not the first. Reeves did this to me 10 years ago. And I kept everything. Let me help you. Attached was a phone number and a file. Elijah downloaded it, pulse rising. Inside the folder were scanned documents, grade appeals, a handwritten letter, and an official complaint form never submitted, all from a former Crest Hill student named Marcus Green. There was also something else, an audio file labeled Reeves 2009, counselor meeting. Elijah hit play. Reeves's voice came through. Cold, familiar, condescending. Some students just aren't cut out for competitive academia. They're used to sympathy and hand-holding, and when the bar gets higher, they fall apart. The voice of a guidance counselor responded. He's a top student. He scored highest on the district's math Olympiad. And then Reeves again. Statistical outliers exist in every demographic. Doesn't mean you lower the standard for the rest. Elijah's stomach turned. This wasn't a new pattern. It was a legacy. Elijah stared at Marcus's number, his fingers hovering above the dial pad, when suddenly his laptop screen flickered. His inbox had just been accessed from another location. When buried voices begin to rise, the ground itself starts to tremble. The following morning, Elijah barely slept. The pale blue glow of his laptop still burned across the room when Denise opened the door. She saw him sitting there, motionless, headphones on, his face unreadable. Elijah? She asked softly. He turned slowly, his voice hoarse. He's done this before. Denise stepped closer. Who? Reeves. To another black student, years ago. He told her about Marcus Green. The name, the files, the audio recording. He played it for her, the tinny sound of Reeves' voice dripping the same subtle venom he used now. Denise covered her mouth halfway through, eyes wide, a chill crawling through her veins. How long has this been happening? She whispered. Since before I was even in middle school, Elijah said. And they let him keep teaching. Denise stared at the wall, fury building behind her silence. Then we're not fighting one teacher, she said finally. We're fighting a system that kept his hands clean for him. They met Marcus that same evening. The cafe was small, tucked between a laundromat and a bus depot downtown. Marcus arrived early, a tall man in his late 20s, his expression calm but eyes tired, like someone who had carried his truth too long. Elijah Walker, he asked, extending his hand. You sound younger than I expected. Elijah managed a half smile. I feel older than I should. Marcus chuckled once. Dry, knowing. When they sat down, Marcus pulled out a worn leather folder from his backpack. Inside were photocopies, notes, and printed emails from. I tried to tell them back then, he said. They called it a misunderstanding. Said I was interpreting feedback emotionally. He slid a page forward. This was my great appeal. Reeves failed me on a research paper I later won an award for. Denise leaned forward. You kept everything. I learned to, Marcus said, because people forget what we go through, unless we can show them receipts. He laid out a timeline, 5 years' worth of correspondence, witnesses and overlooked complaints. In one, a guidance counselor had written, Marcus struggles with authority. Mr. Reeves is merely holding him to high standards. Another letter from a parent mentioned concerns about subtle bias in grading, never answered. Elijah read each page carefully, his pulse rising with every line. Every sentence was a mirror reflecting his own experience. It's the same playbook, he muttered. Different decade. Marcus nodded. That's how this kind of racism survives. It evolves with the language but keeps the same skeleton. Denise closed the folder gently. We're going to end it this time. That night, the Walker's kitchen transformed into a war room. Folders spread across the table. Post-it notes lined the wall. Denise highlighted dates. Elijah typed cross-references into a spreadsheet. They compiled everything. Marcus's testimony, screenshots of Reeves' emails, the lab footage, and Elijah's recordings. They worked in silence at first, the sound of pen on paper replacing the hum of despair that had filled their home for months. This isn't just for us, Denise said finally. It's for every kid who never got the chance to prove they were more than a stereotype. Elijah nodded. He built his career on their silence. We'll build justice out of their noise. When they finished, Denise looked at the pile. We need a lawyer. Elijah hesitated. We can't afford.
I didn't say paying one.
She interrupted. I said finding one. The next morning, Denise contacted the Metro Center for Civil Rights, a local firm known for handling discrimination cases against public institutions. By the afternoon, they had a response. Attorney Janet Rowe agreed to meet them. Her office was lined with framed newspaper clippings, cases she'd fought and won. She greeted them with a firm handshake and no small talk. I've read the initial summary, she said, sliding her glasses up. If even half of what's here is true, this isn't just a complaint. It's a case study in systemic neglect. Marcus's folder sat on her desk. She flipped through the documents like someone assembling a puzzle she already knew the shape of. Grade tampering. Administrative silence. Repeated racial language under the guise of rigor. They've buried a decade of evidence under policy and politeness. She looked at Elijah. And now you have something they can't ignore. Proof that the cycle never stopped. Denise leaned forward. Can you take it? Janet smiled faintly. Pro bono. I wouldn't sleep right if I didn't. Elijah exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. What happens next? He asked. First, Janet said, we file a formal civil rights complaint with the district. Then we subpoena Reeves and the school for all archived correspondence, student evaluations, and grade reports. If they try to bury it again, we make it public. Public, Denise repeated. Trust me, Janet said. Sunlight is the only disinfectant institutions fear. By the next morning, word had already spread again, because nothing at Crest Hill stayed quiet anymore. Local reporters reignited the story. This time, they didn't frame it as a single teacher's prejudice. They called it what it was, a pattern of discrimination hidden in plain sight. Alumni began speaking up. A woman from the class of 2012 tweeted that Reeves had once refused to grade her essay until she wrote in a less urban tone. Another posted an email where Reeves had compared a black student's handwriting to graffiti. Each story sparked another, until a flood of voices filled social media. Crest Hill Academy's carefully polished reputation began to crack. Principal Langford released another statement, tight, lawyer-approved language, that said everything and nothing. The Academy is committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. We cannot comment on ongoing investigations. It was the same brand of bureaucratic mercy Marcus had heard a decade earlier. This time, people weren't buying it. Protesters gathered outside the front gates with signs reading "Silence is complicity" and "Education shouldn't hurt." Inside, students whispered openly now, their fear thinning into collective frustration. Some wore buttons that said, "Stand with Elijah." For the first time, the isolation that had defined Elijah's life at Crest Hill was breaking apart and being replaced by something unexpected. Solidarity. Reeves, meanwhile, had disappeared from campus, officially on administrative leave, unofficially unreachable. His house remained dark at night, blinds drawn. But he wasn't silent. Through his attorney, Reeves sent a statement to local media.
Mr. Reeves categorically denies all allegations of bias or misconduct. Any suggestion otherwise is defamatory. He has always upheld academic integrity and fairness.
Janet read the statement aloud to Elijah and Denise in her office, then tossed the printout aside. The louder they deny, the more they reveal. Denise frowned. You think he'll try to countersue? Almost certainly, Janet said. That's what bullies with power do when they realize the target fought back. Elijah leaned forward. Then let him. He can't outrun the truth forever. 2 weeks later, Janet finished compiling the dossier, a 3-inch thick binder filled with evidence, testimonies, and digital backups. At the top, she placed a single page titled, Formal Civil Rights Complaint, Walker vs. Crest Hill Academy and Dalton Reeves. Denise signed first, then Elijah, then Marcus. Janet gathered the pages carefully, slid them into an envelope, and said, It's time. As she walked to the courthouse steps with the complaint in her briefcase, cameras clicked in the distance. Reporters called out questions about the case, about the school, about the growing movement it had sparked. She didn't stop for sound bites. She filed the documents, stamped and sealed, and emerged into the sunlight. When she returned to her office that evening, an email confirmation awaited her. Subpoena approved. Dalton Reeves. That night, Elijah sat on the porch with Denise, watching the orange glow fade behind the city skyline. They can't pretend anymore, he said quietly. No, she replied, but pretending was never the worst part. Believing they could, that's what broke people. He nodded, letting the silence settle. For the first time, it wasn't heavy. It was full of movement, like the air before a storm. Then his phone buzzed. A new message. Unknown number. He opened it. From Marcus Green. Text. It's starting. Reeves just called me. He wants to meet alone. Elijah's pulse quickened. Elijah stared at the screen, realizing Marcus had just walked straight into the lion's den. And this time Reeves wasn't the one being cornered. How do you win a war where the enemy is the judge, the jury, and the historian? The building was cold, not from the air conditioning, but from the silence in the walls, the clinical hum of fluorescent lights, the grayness of bureaucratic power that didn't need to raise its voice to be dangerous. Elijah sat outside room 3C, in a stiff metal chair. No cameras, no news crews, no classmates. This wasn't the courtroom the public demanded. It was a closed-door performance disguised as due process. The district had called it a special administrative review, a hearing convened to assess allegations involving faculty conduct and potential student violations. The press release said they were committed to transparency, but not a single seat was open to the public. Elijah adjusted the collar of his pressed shirt. Denise sat beside him, her hand firm over his. Neither spoke. Then the door opened. Elijah Walker? A board member called. He rose, entered. The room was stark. One long oak table, 7 people in suits. A voice recorder. No jury, no warrant. He was asked to sit in the lone chair in front of them. The questioning began. Not with Reeves, but with him. Would you describe yourself as a disciplined student? Yes. Have you ever felt overwhelmed by the academic rigor at Crest Hill? No. Have you ever considered that your teacher's criticism was part of his teaching strategy? Elijah swallowed. His words weren't about the work. They were about me. Do you believe you were treated unfairly? Or did you feel pressured to perform and misinterpret that pressure? He stared at them. You've seen the footage. You've read the messages. What do you think? The board members scribbled notes. One asked about the audio recordings. Another questioned whether posting them online violated classroom privacy policies. They weren't posted by me. Elijah clarified. But you recorded them.
Yes. Because no one believed me without proof.
A pause followed. Then someone muttered, We're here to examine facts, not emotion. Elijah stared at them all. I am the fact, he said. Next came Reeves. He entered in a slate gray suit, tie perfectly knotted, jaw clean-shaven. He sat straight, composed, the image of a veteran educator wronged by public hysteria. He called the entire case a misunderstanding. He described Elijah as bright but easily flustered. He said he used tough but equal standards for all students. He denied encouraging sabotage. I've never tolerated vandalism in my classroom. He called the recording edited and contextless. He dismissed Marcus Green's testimony as a bitter former student with an axe to grind. At no point did he raise his voice. At no point did he crack. He was calm, professional, lethal. Denise watched every second, her nails digging into her palm. When it was her turn to speak, she stood without shaking. She didn't bring notes. She didn't read a statement. She spoke like a mother who had buried her patients a long time ago. "My son is not your experiment in silence," she began. "He didn't come to Crest Hill for attention. He came for opportunity, and from day one, you tried to convince him he didn't belong." She locked eyes with each board member. "You want to act like this is new, like it's isolated. But you've seen the patterns, the emails, the footage, the other students who came forward, and still you sit here asking about tone and intent instead of impact." She reached into her purse and pulled out the printed image of Elijah's smashed prototype cables, frayed, water tank shattered. "This is what it looks like when you protect power over potential." Then she sat down. The room was silent. Janet Rowe, their attorney, submitted the compiled evidence, the viral recordings, the lab sabotage video, Elijah's graded work compared to top student Marcus Green's timeline, 8 signed letters from former Black Crest Hill students detailing similar experiences. The board reviewed them without comment. After 5 hours, the chairperson leaned forward. "A decision will be made within the next few weeks. You'll be notified in writing." Denise blinked. "Weeks? These matters require careful consideration." Elijah stood. So did my future. The ride home was wordless. Elijah stared out the window, watching power lines blur past like prison bars. Denise gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary. "They're stalling. They're hoping the story dies down," Elijah said. They both knew the truth. The board wasn't built to deliver justice. It was built to delay consequences until the fire cooled. When they pulled into their apartment complex, Elijah walked up the stairs with lead in his feet. He didn't eat dinner, didn't turn on his laptop. He just sat in the dark. The next morning, Elijah arrived at school early. The hallways felt colder now, like the walls themselves were watching. His locker wouldn't open. A slip of paper was taped to the inside once he finally forced it. "Report to the main office immediately." He knew. He just didn't know how far they'd go. He walked in. Principal Langford was waiting with a folder in hand. "Elijah," he said, avoiding eye contact, "we've reviewed your recent conduct and documentation practices." Elijah didn't speak. Langford continued, "You're being placed on temporary suspension for violating the school's media and recording policy. The recordings breached our privacy guidelines." Elijah blinked. "You mean the recordings that proved I was being harassed?" Langford sighed. "The policy is clear, and so was the footage." Langford handed him the letter. 1 week suspension, indefinite review, disqualification from academic award eligibility. Elijah folded it without reading. "Tell me," he said, "if I hadn't recorded him, would any of you have listened?" Langford didn't answer. Because they both knew. They never would have. Elijah walked out of the office, suspension notice in hand, just as his phone buzzed with a message from the New Horizons STEM committee. "You've been invited to present at the state finals. The louder you speak your truth, the harder they try to silence you." The hallway fell silent as Elijah stepped out of the principal's office. 2 security officers flanked him, not aggressively, but with enough formality to make a scene. Students stopped mid-step, mid-sentence. A few teachers froze near their doors. Someone raised a phone. Click. Flash. Within seconds, the whispers started. "He's getting suspended? For what? Seriously." One student followed at a distance, filming discreetly. Another posted it within minutes. "They're walking him out. Crest Hill's trying to bury him again." By the time Elijah reached the front steps, the cameras were already waiting. Local press activist with live streams, a mother with her toddler in one hand and a sign in the other. "Let him speak. Suspension is suppression. Systemic racism isn't rigorous." The air buzzed with noise and flashing bulbs. But Elijah kept his eyes straight ahead. Denise was waiting in the parking lot. She opened the car door without a word. Inside, the silence between them was deep, but not empty. Elijah pulled the folded suspension letter from his pocket. "They said I violated media policy. That's their excuse." Denise's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "They can't kill the story, so they're trying to kill your credibility." Elijah nodded. "But it's too late. Everyone's watching now." By nightfall, Elijah Walker trended again. Civil rights organizations released statements condemning the district's decision. Several public figures reposted the footage of Elijah's escorted exit, including a well-known U.S. senator who tweeted, "The student spoke the truth. The system punished him. Every parent should be watching this." Crest Hill issued another statement. "We support free expression but must also uphold district guidelines." Mr. Walker's suspension is procedural and unrelated to ongoing investigations. No one believed it. A civil rights march was scheduled for the following week. Alumni began withdrawing donations from Crest Hill. And through it all, Elijah sat quietly at the kitchen table, a circuit board in one hand, a notebook in the other. He wasn't just going to fight. He was going to finish what he started. 2 days into his suspension, an email pinged his inbox. From New Horizons STEM Board. Subject: regarding your upcoming presentation. He opened it with cautious hand. We understand you are currently unable to access school resources. We are offering you a virtual presentation alternative. If you accept, we will ship equipment and materials needed for a live stream demonstration. Please confirm within 24 hours. Elijah read it 3 times, then whispered, "Yeah." The next morning, Denise cleared the living room. The coffee table became a lab bench. The curtains were replaced with blackout cloths for lighting control. Malik dragged in his family's ring light and a camera tripod. Elijah's blueprint board went up against the wall. Wires ran across the carpet. A second-hand router boosted their connection speed. It wasn't a professional studio, but it was his. They rehearsed daily. Malik played judge. Denise asked tough questions. Terrence stopped by again to review the structural stress points in Elijah's water tank housing. The project worked flawlessly. Solar-powered, portable, affordable, and real. News stations started calling. Some asked for interviews. Others sent reporters to stand across the street from Crest Hill, broadcasting updates like a breaking political scandal. Every day, Elijah's name spread further. But none of it felt like vindication. It felt like pressure. Because now the world wasn't just watching the injustice. They were watching him. On the morning of the state finals, Elijah woke at 5 a.m., eyes wide open. Denise had laid out his clothes the night before, black button-down pressed slacks, a silver tie. "You look like a scientist," she whispered, as she adjusted his collar. "I am one," he said, voice steady. They tested the stream connection, double-checked the light angles, ran through his slides one last time. Then he sat, camera on, microphone hot. He logged in. A soft chime welcomed him into the virtual conference room. Other participants' screens flickered on. Rows of brilliant minds in labs, classrooms and dorms. Some had full team setups. Others were solo, like him. Then came the host. "Welcome to the New Horizons State STEM Finals. Our judges include award-winning engineers, professors and industry veterans. Each finalist will present live and take questions." Elijah's throat tightened. The presentation slots were randomized. He was third. He stared into the camera. Slides loaded. Demo ready. His name was called. Up next, Elijah Walker, Crest Hill Academy. He took a breath and began. His voice was calm, measured. He spoke about filtration access in underserved communities, about solar optimization, about data-tested purification systems for remote towns and school districts. He showed live footage of his prototype in action. Water flowing in cloudy, exiting clear. He quoted test results, referenced journals, anticipated follow-ups. Then he paused. "My project isn't just science," he said. "It's survival. Because where I come from, the problems we solve aren't hypothetical. They're daily. They're personal." He ended with a simple phrase: "Science only works if it serves everyone." The panel applauded. Judges nodded. Then came the questions. One judge asked about voltage regulation. Another about scalability. He answered each one with precision, citing his backup files. Then a new face appeared. Sharp suit, clean glasses, voice smooth as glass. "Elijah," the man said, "your methodology is solid. Very impressive." Elijah's blood went cold. He knew that voice. The judge introduced himself. Dr. Dalton Reeves, adjunct panelist, representing a local education initiative. The screen didn't flicker, but Elijah's heart did. Reeves smiled politely. "I only have one question," he said. "Do you believe this presentation reflects the same integrity you demonstrated at school?" The other judges paused. Elijah stared at the screen. He wasn't sure what stunned him more, that Reeves was here, or that he asked the question so publicly. Elijah unmuted his mic slowly, staring into the face of the man who tried to destroy him, and said, "Let's talk about integrity, Mr. Reeves." The room fell silent. "The same man who told you you'd fail is now judging your future, live on national stage." Elijah stared into his screen, heart pounding behind the neatly buttoned shirt Denise had ironed that morning. On the panel of judges, framed in a box like all the others, sat Mr. Reeves. His face was calm, unreadable. But to Elijah, the stillness said everything. Reeves had followed him here, not through merit but through strategy. It wasn't enough to suspend him, isolate him, erase his work. Now the man who tried to destroy him would sit in judgment as he defended the very thing he built to escape him. The host's voice rang out again. Elijah Walker, you're live in 5, 4, 3. The red light blinked on, and Elijah began. He didn't smile. He didn't flinch. He started with the data. This is a low-cost, solar-powered water filtration unit, designed for underserved and rural communities, he said. It purifies contaminated water using a compact UV chamber, a removable carbon membrane, and an integrated solar panel for remote functionality. He moved through his slides with surgical clarity, each metric tested, each prototype demonstrated. On screen, the live camera showed the water tank as murky fluid entered and came out crystal clear on the other side. But it wasn't just about numbers. Elijah's voice changed when he reached the final slide. The problem with most solutions is they assume everyone starts in the same place. But where I come from, access isn't theoretical. It's the difference between illness and survival. My project isn't just a model, it's a bridge. To equity, to safety, to a version of science that remembers the people it was meant to serve. He paused. I wasn't supposed to be here, he said. Not just because of how the system works, but because of how people protect it. He didn't say Reeves' name. He didn't have to. He let the silence hang for 2 long beats before closing. Science is only powerful if it reaches the people who've never had it fight for them. This is my version of power. Then he nodded. The room was still. Then applause, subtle at first, then louder, even from other student participants. But Reeves, he simply leaned forward. Thank you, Elijah, he said, voice cool. I appreciate your presentation. Just one question. Elijah knew it was coming. Some of your designs, Reeves said, appear borrowed from open source platforms. Can you confirm your work is original, not derivative? It was surgical, a quiet accusation. Elijah met his gaze through the camera. All science is built on previous knowledge. What makes mine different is how I applied it. In a week, after my prototype was destroyed, in a school lab, the other judges shifted. One cleared her throat. Elijah, she said, can you explain your energy retention rate during cloud cover? He did, without notes. Another asked about implementation in disaster zones. He answered, with stats. Then a third, and another. He never stumbled. He never blinked. Each answer sliced through doubt with the kind of composure that came not from privilege, but from pressure. By the time the Q&A ended, the applause was no longer polite. It was thunderous. Even the host smiled. Thank you, Elijah. That was one of the most moving and technically impressive presentations we've seen today. Elijah muted his mic, leaned back, and exhaled. He didn't realize how tight his chest had been until that moment. Malik messaged instantly. Burrow, you murdered that. Denise texted from the kitchen. So proud of you. Win or lose, you won. He smiled. For the first time in weeks, it felt like more than survival. It felt like arrival. The rest of the presentations continued. Some were brilliant. One team built a wildfire mapping drone. Another designed a biodegradable plastic alternative using seaweed. The competition was fierce, but Elijah's was the only one rooted in lived urgency. Still, as the hours passed, doubt crept in. He could feel it crawling behind the applause, hiding beneath every unread comment thread. Would they let him win? Could they? And then the host reappeared on screen. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for the New Horizons State STEM Final. Our judges have submitted their scores, and we are ready to announce the finalist. Elijah sat upright. His mother entered the room behind him, quiet as a breath. The host began. In third place with their work on ocean-based data mapping systems, Chloe and Mateo Vasquez, from Alameda, Texas. Applause. Elijah felt a pulse in his temple. In second place, for their work in fire mitigation and drone deployment, Team Resilience from Sierra Charter. More applause. Then, and our first place finalist. A pause, longer than necessary, for a project combining innovation, resilience, and real-world applicability. Elijah held his breath. He waited. Sierra Creek Regional High. We congratulate Maya Thompson for her C-cell plastic alternative. The screen clapped. Elijah's chest didn't fall. It caved, not because Maya didn't deserve it. Her work was strong, but because something in the silence afterward felt manufactured. No honorable mentions, no technical excellence nod, no acknowledgement of impact. He scanned the judges' faces on the recap screen. All neutral, except one. Reeves was smiling, not broadly, just enough. Enough to say, even here, I decide who rises. Denise reached for her son's shoulder. Elijah, she whispered. He shook his head, muted the applause, closed the laptop, stared at the wall, then stood, not defeated, not broken, just silent, until his phone buzzed. A new notification from the STEM committee portal. It read, "Correction pending, please check final scores tab." Elijah tapped the screen, and what he saw made his eyes widen. His score was higher than the winner's. Sometimes, justice waits until the world is watching, and then it struck. The live stream had ended. Elijah sat back in his chair, the glow of the laptop screen reflecting off his tired eyes. Behind him, Denise and Malik were talking quietly, but he couldn't hear the words. His heart was still racing, fingers still hovering over the keyboard. He thought the moment was over. Then he heard the host's voice crack through again. "Ladies and gentlemen, one more announcement." Elijah froze. Across the thousands of live viewers, comments started flashing. "Wait, what? Something's up. Did they mess up?" The judge cut the celebration short. The lead judge stepped forward, clearing her throat. "A correction is required," she said, voice calm but firm. "Due to a technical submission glitch, the scores were misprocessed. We've recalculated the results." She paused, letting the moment stretch. "The top score in the competition belongs to Elijah Walker, Crest Hill Academy." A stunned silence. Then thunderous applause broke out. Phones lifted, screens flashed, spectators erupted. The irony. The very man who had told Elijah he wasn't worthy watched as the world corrected its own error. From the living room, Denise gasped. Malik jumped up. On live feed, panels of students cheered. The host raised the trophy. Elijah's jaw dropped. He didn't move. The recognition felt surreal. Not victory, but vindication. On the screen, Mr. Reeves's face faltered for a fraction of a second. He had been smiling just minutes earlier, extending personal thanks to Elijah for his presentation. Now his lips twisted into something tighter. A forced smile. The audience didn't notice. They only saw Elijah standing. Camera zoomed in on his face. The moment was lit like a spotlight. Denise rushed over, pulled him up. "You did it! You did it!" she whispered. Elijah nodded, voice quiet. "We did it." He stepped forward, accepted the trophy, and the cheers filled his speakers. But what he felt was the echo of something deeper change. Back at Crest Hill Academy, the board received a flood of media coverage. The hashtag Elijah Walker was everywhere. News channels picked up the story, interviews followed, investigators, activists, and alumni weighed in. The prestige of the school hung in the balance. Principal Langford sat in his office, phone pressed to his ear. "Yes, board members," he muttered. "Yes, the media have requested a statement. We are preparing one now." Inside the boardroom, endless screens displayed tweets, news clips and live streams. One board member muttered, "We underestimated the reach." Another added quietly, "We need to act." The pressure spun out of their control. Reeves, meanwhile, had little room left. The media had found posts, old yearbooks, alumni records, all pointing to a pattern. The board moved quietly, but decisively. A letter was drafted. "Mr. Dalton Reeves resigns effective immediately. An independent equity review panel will be instituted to audit AP class grading and faculty practices." It circulated among lawyers and trustees. Reeves wrote his response to be released by his attorney. "I resign to allow Crest Hill Academy to focus on the future and uphold the highest standards of education." That evening, the resignation was public. Headlines read, "Prestigious private school engineer resigns amid racism scandal." The same institution that once silenced Elijah now had to answer to it. Elijah sat in his bedroom, later that night. The trophy stood on his desk, alongside his prototype. He stared at the components, the soldered wires, the patched solar panel, the clean water tank. Two parallel stories, one of the system that tried to erase him, and one of the system he built. Malik texted, "Congrats. What's next?" Elijah typed back slowly, "Now we fix the system." He looked at the notification blinking on his phone, An email from MIT admissions, unopened. The change wasn't just personal anymore, it was systemic. The conversation was no longer about one teacher's bias. It was about how institutions answered when the world demanded accountability. And in that moment he realized something he had known all along. Victory didn't feel like a medal. It felt like interruption. Denise knocked and came in. She sat beside him. "You have no idea how many people watched you today, Elijah." "I do," he said. "But none of that matters unless change happens." She took his hand. "Well, the school board announced the equity panel. Reeves is gone. People are talking." He nodded. "This doesn't undo the years, or the ones who came before me." "No," she agreed. "But it opens a door." He exhaled. "But what about the competition?" he asked. "What if winning this doesn't mean winning everything? Then you bring everything you learned here and use it for others," she answered. "You already know how." He looked at the trophy again. "This is just the beginning." The next morning, reporters were camped outside Crest Hill's gates again. Students watched from windows. Alumni shared stories. The story had consumed headlines for 48 hours now. Boards of education across the state were reviewing policies. Civil rights organizations filed pending motions. The air smelled different. Expectation. At school, Elijah returned for one day. He wasn't yet fully reinstated, but the board announced he could attend classes pending evaluation. The hallways held a new static. Students nodded. When he passed, some greeted him. Some teachers made eye contact. Others looked away. In the lab, a freshman approached and said quietly, "Hey, congrats. Your project is amazing." Elijah smiled. Not a big smile. A gentle one. "Thanks," he replied. Reeves's old office sat empty now. The door locked. A nameplate removed. In a letter to parents, Crest Hill announced, "Effective immediately, an independent review of all AP courses will be conducted by a third-party equity council." It was language they should have used years ago. At home, that email from MIT caught his eye again. He opened it. "Dear Mr. Walker, we'd like to talk. Please contact our admissions director at your earliest convenience." His heart skipped. It wasn't proof of success. It was proof of possibility. He took his phone. He called Denise. "Mom," he said quietly, "MIT wants to talk." She laughed softly. "I know. Wasn't sure if good or bad," he admitted. She smiled. "It's good. Really good." He hung up. Then he looked at his phone again. A notification popped up, an alert from the Equity Council. "Meeting witness statement required. Dalton Reeves era." He swallowed. The wheels of justice were moving. But more than that, they were rolling. And Elijah was no longer just a student. He was a paradigm. Elijah took a deep breath and walked out onto his porch, the trophy gleaming in the twilight behind him. When his phone rang again and on the screen appeared unknown number state board. What they built to break him became the path that raised him. Elijah Walker felt the acceptance letter in his hands for hours before he dared open it. The envelope had arrived on a crisp morning in late April. Its wax seal broken, the words inside shimmering with possibility. He sat at the kitchen table with Denise, the light from the window catching the proud glint in her eyes as she looked at him. For so long they had fought, waited, strategized, but this time the fight was over. Or at least this part of it was. "Massachusetts Institute of Technology, full scholarship, honors program," the letter read, and for a second the world outside the window seemed blurry, as if his life were pausing to allow the magnitude of the moment to settle in. Denise reached across, took his hand, and squeezed it so tightly he could feel her strength transmute into his own. No jubilation. No scene of wild celebration. The weight of it was too big for fireworks. It felt like relief. In the months that followed, he watched his project transform from quiet rebellion into public purpose. A non-profit organization specializing in water access in underserved communities offered primary funding for his solar-powered filtration prototype. Meetings were held. Contracts were signed. The lab in Malik's garage was upgraded with professional instrumentation. His project went from homework to mission. Denise watched him one evening as he prepared for a TEDx talk he'd been invited to deliver on systemic bias in science education. Her eyes misted as he practiced his opening line in the living room. "When you're told you'll fail before you even start, you learn the wrong lesson. That the system defines you." She corrected his pacing gently, offered feedback on inflection, but mostly she sat quietly, listening to him reshape his story. She saw in him not just her son but a young man transforming pain into argument, rejection into proposal, prejudice into proof. Then came the day he returned to Crest Hill Academy. not as the scorned transfer student, but as a guest speaker. The auditorium seats had been polished, lights calibrated, the podium placed center stage. He walked in wearing his MIT pin on his lapel, and the students recognized him before he spoke. The boy who sat alone, the boy whose project was sabotaged, the boy who refused to fade. They cheered. The sound rolled through the room like a tide that had been waiting to break. A new principal greeted him, Dr. Kamara Johnson, the first black principal in Crest Hill's history. She shook his hand with such certainty and genuine respect that Elijah thought his childhood self would have smiled at the sight. She introduced him, a model of what happens when potential meets persistence and justice. No tokenism, no platitude, just recognition. On stage, Elijah spoke with clarity and power. He described his journey. Grades changed arbitrarily, teachers making assumptions before they spoke, projects destroyed quietly, a voice ignored until it became too loud to silence. He punctuated his data with stories, ducking the lunchroom glances, buying parts for his prototype from scrap bins, hearing his mother tell him, "You're going to shine whether they see it or not." The audience leaned forward. The younger students looked at him not as someone who survived, but someone who unlocked. After his talk, the nonprofit announced that his filtration system would be deployed in 3 communities, rural, resource poor, often sidelined, testing now under real conditions. Media cameras captured him alongside Denise, Damien, no physical conflict, but a figurative name for his project collaborator Malik, and engineers from the nonprofit unpacking crates of panels, membranes, and prototype kits. The narrative had shifted. This was no longer a story of victimhood, but of victory through value. National education initiatives picked it up. A campaign titled Equity and Excellence launched, citing Elijah's work as emblematic of the shift needed for gifted black youth. Headlines read, "From target to trailblazer, he was told he'd fail, now he designs the solution." His name became part of school board discussions, philanthropic agendas, and classroom lesson plans. Teachers across the country referenced his story when introducing units on bias in STEM. One quiet night, Elijah sat in his childhood bedroom at home, a few boxes remaining from the move to Boston. He opened the drawer that once held his lab notebook from that semester. He pulled out a folded page with the memory of the D grade from Mr. Reeves. He held it, the red ink still vivid, his eyes closed. Leaning into the mirror, he whispered, "You were never the problem." The words were meant for the boy who first walked into that classroom at Crest Hill, full of hope and already prejudged. He realized the problem had never been him. The problem was everything that tried to tell him he was. And then the final act of his return unfolded in the same physics classroom, where it had started. The desks were the same, but the energy changed. He stood at the podium. He faced students, some new, some old. He scanned the room until his gaze landed on a new face. Another black student, younger, nervous. She clutched her notebook, eyes flicking around the room. As the students began to applaud at the end of his presentation, he watched her take a seat. She sat not at the back, but center row. She entered this space differently this time. Not alone, not deflated, but visible. When the applause peaked, Elijah stepped aside and exited the stage. The students chanted his name. The camera lights clicked. Outside, journalists gathered. He raised his hand, smiled, and in that moment he recognized the cycle had changed. He walked out into the corridor, under the same fluorescent lights, his trophy in hand, but his purpose transformed. Behind him, students re-entered that classroom. The younger black student took her seat. The door closed behind her, but the sound of possibility remained open. As Elijah walked out of the auditorium, students chanting his name, a notification popped up on his phone. Live stream starting now. Your story is being broadcast worldwide. If you've ever been told you don't belong, just because of who you are, then you know Elijah's story isn't rare. It's real. It's happening everywhere. Type yes if you believe brilliance should never be silenced. Subscribe if this broke your heart and opened your eyes.